Let's talk about a single point of failure. A stretch of water so incredibly small you could probably cross it in a speedboat. A vulnerability so concentrated it can hold the entire global economy hostage. We're talking about the 33-kilometer problem.
So you gotta ask, right? How can one tiny, congested shipping lane possibly become the trigger for a full-blown global crisis?
Well, it's because when that waterway slams shut, it doesn't just stop a few ships. It shatters supply chains, it sends prices through the roof, and it creates these massive shockwaves that, believe me, will reach every single one of us. So today, we're going to follow those ripples, from the very center of the crisis all the way out. Okay, let's get into it.
To really get what happened, we first have to understand the place itself. Why is this one little spot on the map so unbelievably critical?
This is the Strait of Hormuz. It is the only way for ships to get from the Persian Gulf out into the open ocean. That's it. And at its narrowest point, it's just 33 kilometers wide. Think about that. Every single ship carrying all that energy and all those goods out of the Gulf states has to squeeze through this one tiny bottleneck.
And here is the number that changes everything. 20%. A full fifth of the entire planet's oil supply, plus a huge amount of its natural gas, flows right through that strait. So, when it gets blockaded, the global energy tap is basically turned down by 20%, overnight.
And that brings us to the first ripple of the crisis. The impact wasn't felt equally at all. For the nations right there on the Persian Gulf, it was immediate and it was absolutely catastrophic.
You can just feel the raw panic in this statement from Qatar's energy minister Al-Kabi, right as things started to go sideways. This will bring down economies of the world. For him, this wasn't some abstract economic theory. This was an existential threat, and it was happening right now.
This slide just perfectly shows how fast it all fell apart. It was a complete systemic collapse. First, their energy exports, the absolute lifeblood of their economies, are completely stranded. Then, it gets worse. 70% of their food imports are cut off, so prices just explode. Then you have a tax on desalination plants threatening the drinking water supply. With the airspace closed, major travel hubs like Dubai and Doha just go silent. The result? A mass exodus of the very workers and tourists that these economies are built on. The whole model was just shattered in a matter of days.
So, what about that next ripple? Well, the energy crisis didn't just stay in the Gulf. Of course not. It leaped across continents, slamming right into the industrial powerhouses of Europe and Asia.
Now, what's really interesting here is how the exact same event created two totally different crises. Over in Europe, it was a brutal second energy crisis. They were just coming off a really harsh winter, so their gas storage was already at a dangerous low, only 30%. The blockade made prices nearly double. Then you look at Asia, and for them, the problem was sheer dependency. Countries like Japan and South Korea relied so heavily on Qatari gas. So when Qatar Energy declared force majeure, which is basically them saying they can't fulfill their contracts, it severed a vital supply line, and Asian LNG prices more than doubled.
And if you're wondering what that looks like for an ordinary person, well, here you go. This chart shows gas prices in Germany. In just 1 month, the price at the pump jumped by 15%. That's the global shockwave hitting your wallet.
And this third ripple, this is where things get really complicated. Because the crisis spread way beyond just energy. It started to infect every single part of the global economy. From high-tech manufacturing all the way down to the food on our tables. Yeah, so it wasn't just oil and gas tankers that were stuck. The blockade stopped the flow of all these other key materials you never even think about. Suddenly, 45% of the world's traded sulfur, which is essential for fertilizer, was gone. The price of helium, which you need for making semiconductors and for MRI machines, tripled. And 9% of the world's aluminum supply was disrupted, hammering car makers. It was this hidden commodity crisis, all triggered by that same single choke point.
And the impact was felt literally everywhere. In the United States, even with all its own domestic production, gas prices still shot up 30%, hitting $4 a gallon. Over in the UK, the crisis pushed expected inflation over the 5% mark, just adding more fuel to their cost of living crisis.
And this brings us right back to the beginning. Remember that sulfur disruption? Well, it caused fertilizer prices to jump 40% in just 2 weeks. And that threatened lower crop yields, sparking fears of a brand new global food crisis. So, what happens after a shock like this? Well, now we've got to look at the lasting damage and the desperate search for a way to make sure this can never happen again.
This quote from the head of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, just hits the nail on the head. The vase has been broken once, and it's very difficult to fix. He's talking about trust. The crisis proved that this vital global supply chain was just terrifyingly fragile. And even if the strait reopens, that fear, the economic scarring, that stuff remains. In response, some major new ideas started to emerge. And the most prominent one is this: a brand new pipeline running from Iraq's massive Basra oil fields, going overland through Turkey all the way to the Mediterranean port of Ceyhan. The logic is really simple. If you can't sail through the strait, you have to go around it. This is a huge strategic project, and it's being pushed as a way for Europe especially to secure its energy supply by bypassing Hormuz for good.
But that leaves us with the final and pretty unsettling question. This crisis showed the world just how vulnerable we are to a single point of failure. And yeah, a pipeline might solve this one choke point. But in a globalized system that's full of them, is one more bypass ever truly enough?